All right. I've been wanting to make this video for a while now to talk about my pet commander. This got me back into the game of Magic about 3.5 years ago now. It incorporates all of the things I love to do: draw cards, play lands. Simic Commander Tatyova, Benthic Druid, and this being my pet deck, it's pretty pimped out. But I'll go through my list. But what I want to say is, I do not claim in any way that this is the best build of Tatyova. I know there are plenty of builds out there. I do consider this a CEDH deck. However, it is built more as an answer to the metagame currently. It's more of a hate deck than anything, in my opinion. But there are lots of different ways that you can take this deck. I choose to lean into Null Rod and Curse Totem quite a bit, and you'll hear me talk about those cards and the reasoning behind certain card choices. So, those not familiar with Tatyova, she's a legendary creature, Merfolk Druid, 3/3, blue-green, 3 colorless, and that little bit of text, anytime you make landfall, you draw a card and you gain a life. So, absolutely huge. The deck's linchpin is really Ghostly Flicker. So, Ghostly Flicker combined with the land Mystic Sanctuary, which we'll talk about later, does just absolutely bonkers things with Tatyova. Can keep you in a loop where you continuously draw out your Ghostly Flicker. You can make infinite mana. You can gain infinite life. Just a really powerful spell all the way around. Has so much versatility, and also combos very well with a number of creatures that we're running that are kind of resilient to the effects of Curse Totem. Obviously, playing Simic, we're going to have a counter suite. Swan Song, 1 blue mana, so versatile, taking out enchantments, instants, and sorceries when you're talking about CEDH. A lot of instants, especially you want your counter magic to be as efficient as possible in regard to mana constraints. Flusterstorm, Mental Misstep. Mental Misstep, I was on the fence for a while, started playing with it. It's just so good. It answers so many things in the CEDH format. Really kind of turned my favorite toward this card. Really love it. Pact of Negation, Force of Will, Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, Mana Drain, which is just an absolute all-star, especially when you're playing a 5-drop commander. This can be just massive early game. This is the oddball. Most folks are going to question basic vanilla counterspell. I know that a double blue in the CEDH format, that's pretty intense on your mana requirements, and obviously paying 2 for counter magic may not be the best deal. But it's tried and true, right? It just says no. And there are so many things happening right now where you don't want to be holding a Dispel and your opponent's going for Underworld Breach, for example, or a Dockside, right? Sometimes you just need to be able to say no. I would say that there are cards in the deck that I consider kind of like on the bubble. It's not quite there yet for me, but I could certainly see folks wanting to make that cut or trying other cards in its place. Trickbind, a little piece of spicy tech. I absolutely love it. No way in heck I'm ever cutting it. Just beats up on Thassa's Oracle. Really any activated or triggered effect. The split second is what makes it so relevant. Most folks never see it coming. Just a really great card all the way around. Mystical Tutor, we're limited in our tutor options. Intuition, again, we're limited into our tutor options. Funnily enough, I find myself intuitioning quite often for 3 fetch lands just to go get my Mystic Sanctuary. But, don't leave home without it. Rapid Hybridization and also Pongify. Functional reprints of the same effect, right? Destroy a creature, they get a 3/3 vanilla dude. Great trade-off. I don't know that this much spot removal is necessary, especially with so many creatures running around with ward, things of that effect. So One of these certainly on the bubble for cut. I was playing Reality Shift for quite a while, and I had some shenanigans with Reality Shift and Forbidden Orchard. You could actually exile your opponent's deck by giving them Orchard tokens, doing Reality Shift, and then doing Ghostly Flicker loops over and over and over. Ultimately, it cut it. It was it felt win more, and in testing and in countless games, it was just never great. So it opened up a flex spot on Reality Shift. I put this in, been testing it. I haven't been super impressed. So again, this would be something to consider cutting for something you'd be in favor of. Brainstorm, 1 blue instant, draw 3, put 2 back from your hand on top of your library. You're playing the full suite of fetch lands. Card selection, is always going to be good in a control deck, and I do consider this, mid-game control. So it's fantastic. Chain of Vapor, so versatile, so many things you can do with it. You can use it offensively, defensively at the cost of 1 blue mana. There are instances where you just want to pop some of your lands back into your own graveyard so that you can utilize Ruminant Excavator and also Crucible of Worlds. So really subtle little tricks with it too, in addition to just being hey, 1 blue mana, bounce it. Cyclonic Rift, I think that goes without saying. Crop rotation, we're a landfall deck, we're lands heavy strategy. A lot of utility lands. It's great. It's a wonderful tutor, and it gets us Tatyova triggers. So I'll find myself in situations where, I make Tatyova, I play a fetch land, I net 2 cards, I crop rotate the land away, get another fetch land. So essentially, making 4 cards off of my Tatyova. It's pretty awesome. Noxious Revival, free regrowth, nothing to shake a stick at. You can do shenanigans where you Noxious Revival with the Tatyova trigger on the stack to get the card back. There are loops that you can do with your Ghostly Flicker to keep yourself from decking with Noxious Revival. So really great card, very versatile. Veil of Summer, more interaction. Just such a solid card in the CEDH meta since it replaces itself. Nature's Claim. Look, I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. We are definitely soft to rule of law effects. And so we want to find answers to them in quick and efficiently. Nature's Claim, so versatile at 1 mana. Just so many targets out there, whether or not we're going to go the mana denial plan on one of our opponents. We're taking out something like Aetherflux Reservoir or any number of artifact enchantment targets, but it's really phenomenal. Beast Within, again, versatility, being able to answer any permanent, lands included, planeswalkers included, at such a low cost, giving them a 3/3 vanilla at 40 life is just nothing. But the 3 mana does kind of hurt. I wouldn't say that I'm at the point where I'm cutting it, but it's definitely been something that's been considered time and time again. But overall, I'm fairly happy with it, so it's here for now. As I mentioned, we're Simic, so our tutor options are pretty limited. Solve the equation, search for any instant or sorcery card. A lot of times we're going for Ghostly Flicker. Sometimes we're going for Temporal Manipulation so that we can combo out, go infinite turns. Sometimes we just want crop rotation. Pretty versatile. As versatile as it's going to get for Simic, right? Merchant Scroll, I know it's German. You may not be able to read it, but blue colorless sorcery, search your library for a blue instant. Again, we're limited on our tutor options. It does go and get Ghostly Flicker. It goes against counter magic. A lot of times it may as well just say go get your mana drain, which you can basically stall out the table while you're holding onto that counter magic. And I enjoy it. I've always loved this card. I played Vintage for a number of years, back when it was called Type 1 for any other old heads. And for you kids out there, we walked uphill in the snow 2 miles each way to buy our packs of Fallen Empires so that we could, all right, I apologize, this was in Homelands. So we bought our packs of Homelands so that we could get this card, and it may as well have said, go get your Ancestral Recall. So it's not a bad option. Lorien Revealed. This card is one of the most exciting modern cards for me. It goes and gets our Mystic Sanctuary for 1 mana. Gives us a shuffle effect. It goes and it thins out. It goes and gets Breeding Pool. It goes and gets Tropical Island. It gets Basic Island, right? Oh yeah, and there's also this little part up here where you can pay to draw 3 cards in late game. It's almost never relevant, but it's there if you would need it. And it's blue, so it pitches the Force of Will, Force of Negation. This card is amazing. Preordain, card selection, just ensuring I'm hitting my land drops in early game. This is something I've considered at different points cutting, so it is kind of a bubble card. I don't know that there are necessarily, many better options, but it's something where I could see an argument to cut in favor of, more counter magic or, more counter magic. Ponder, kind of the same thing. Again, I know this is German, but 1 blue, sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, so it's not a draw. It's not going to trigger Orcus Bowmaster, which is nice. So once you look at those 3, you can put them back in any order and then draw a card. Or if you don't like the 3, you can choose to put them back on top, shuffle your library, and then just draw a random card, right? So again, it's been on the fringe. I haven't brought myself to cut it yet, but I could see an argument for it. Temporal manipulation. Well, I used to play Time Warp. I love Time Warp. I love the art on Time Warp until I had it deflecting swatted in an event, and that wasn't fun. This one says you take another turn after this, not target player takes a turn after this. So it can't be redirected, which is pretty awesome. Extra turns, never a bad thing, and especially when we're in Simic, where we're really going to utilize that extra turn pretty hard, right? We're going to be able to advance our board state dramatically, make landfalls, just ramp, drawing cards. But with Mystic Sanctuary and Ghostly Flicker, or trade routes, you can go infinite turns essentially, which we can win with combat damage. We can win with all sorts of little tricks here and there. Yeah, really great card. Ramp. So we are playing Null-Rod. We're leaning into Null-Rod. We're not playing all the mana rocks that we possibly could. So in place of that, we're playing something like this, right? 3 visits. It could be ramping, or Nature's Lore, I think, is the functional reprint. Well, this would be the functional reprint of that. That was a little bit of an older card, but I prefer this artwork. Search for library for a forest card. It can be Breeding Pool. It can be Tropical Island. The benefit, it comes into play untapped, right? But it can also trigger your Tatyova, which is going to net you a card in life. Yeah, really great card. I actually tried Nature's Lore and 3 visits, and ultimately I found that it wasn't necessary to have both. One was just fine, and there are even little tricks you can do with this in Mystic Sanctuary. So next we'll look at the creatures. So one of the things when we're going into our loops with Ghostly Flicker is going to take 2 lands, exile them, bring them back in, right? It flickers them back in, which triggers the Tatyova twice. The issue is Ghostly Flicker costs 3, and we're only getting 2 back, right? So we need to kind of be mana neutral or net mana, ideally. Baral, Chief of Compliance, he gets us there. He makes it so that your Ghostly Flicker is going to hit Mystic Sanctuary and 1 other land, paying for itself, netting you 1 card and 2 life each cycle because you're getting back the Ghostly Flicker. So how it works is you target Mystic Sanctuary and another land with your Ghostly Flicker. It's reduced by 1 because of Baral. The lands flicker back in, Mystic Sanctuary on the stack, the trigger. You're going to put your Ghostly Flicker back on top of your library. Then you have your Tatyova triggers. It's going to draw you that Ghostly Flicker right away. It's also going to draw you the next card on top of your deck. You're going to gain 2 life. Rinse, wash, repeat. Sculpt the perfect hand until you want to take another turn, swing in with your dudes, or get to Sunscorched Desert and start dealing pings galore. Lots of fun things you can do with it. What I like about Baral is the versatility, right? 1/3, so it has a little bit of a, as I like to call it, a butt on it. 3 is no joke. It's a little more difficult to kill. Yes, I understand Lightning Bolt's out there, Sword to Plowshare is out there, but no slouch, especially for 2 mana. It pitches to all of your blue interactions, so Force of Will, Force of Negation, which is always nice. And then that little bit where if you counter something, you get to loot. You draw a card and then you discard a card. So card selection is really phenomenal in this deck. I love just sifting through as quickly as possible, kind of sculpting things out. So he's really good. Ledger Shredder, I was on the fence over this card for a long while. I know it was getting really hot in standard and then modern. I was kind of seeing a lot of play. Finally broke down, started testing it, and wow, was I wrong. This card is so good. Just the amount of card selection that it gets for you, and it becomes a real threat rather quickly that your opponents have to deal with. It can play defense, it can start to play offense in the late game. This guy has eaten so many swords to plowshares. He's just really, really good. Not even close to considering cutting him. Gilded Drake, 2 mana, steal their creature. Droneth Magistrate is a horrendous nightmare to deal with for this deck, and there are others out there, obviously, but for 2 mana, it's just such a good deal. And if you've ever played with this card, you know it's a no-brainer. You have to include it. Fairy Mastermind is one that I've been on the fence over. Card got spoiled. I fell in love, started playtesting with it, got my foil copy, threw it in. Haven't been terribly impressed with it. I know there's the argument, well, we're in a Bowmaster meta. Bowmaster can pick it off so easily. Not as scared of that. It's just, it really doesn't net me many cards. It almost feels like I'm behind if I've reached a point where I'm playing him. I know that sounds odd, but that's just in my testing. So definitely consideration to be cut. Tishana's Tidebender. Tidebinder. I don't know why I continue to call this card the Tidebender, probably because of the artwork, but it is the Tidebinder, which makes sense because it's similar to Trickbind, right? Counter target activated or triggered ability. This is really in there to deal with things like Tivit, Aetherflux Reservoir, Thassa's Oracle, all sorts of, triggers out there in the CEDH meta. The thing I don't like, I mean, that 3 mana is no joke. So holding open 3 mana, it's almost like you're telegraphing this guy. My playtesting, it hasn't been phenomenal. It hasn't necessarily won me any games yet. There have been very few situations where I've said, man, I just wish I had my Tidebinder in my hand. So again, testing it currently. Don't know how long she's going to hang around. That's yet to be determined. Eternal Witness is phenomenal, right? It's a regrowth with a body attached to it. Gets me back any one of my answers from the graveyard that I would need situationally. Really gets around that one of copy with EDH in general. And then also with Ghostly Flicker, you can Ghostly Flicker your Mystic Sanctuary and your Eternal Witness when you're doing certain loops and start netting cards back and keep yourself from decking, doing all sorts of neat things with her. So really a big fan. Not going anywhere. Endurance, it's a newer edition. Again, another one that I wanted to play with, but I couldn't quite find the right cut for it. Finally did, and now it's not. It's never leaving this deck. So good, just the ability to protect your graveyard, use it offensively and defensively, because once the jig is up and people realize what you're trying to do with Ghostly Flicker, they're obviously going to try to break it up, and any graveyard hate, they're going after it. So this can help protect that. And then if they're doing any kind of shenanigans with Underworld Breach especially, you have this. And then it's a 3/4 flash reach. Man, I've caught players with their pants down, so to speak, where I've been able to take out some of their critters. Really love this card. And then of course the whole evoke thing. These elemental incarnations out of this set were just silly. Manglehorn, this has proven to be an all-star, especially in CDH where mana rocks are prevalent. Early game, my dear lord, if I can go land, Mana Crypt, and Manglehorn on turn 1, and I'm early in turn order, first of all, it blows up an artifact. So if anyone's gone before me, hopefully I can get their mana rock. But then artifacts your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So it really stalls out mana rocks, stalls out treasures, which treasures everywhere right now. So really awesome card. And then you can do Ghostly Flicker shenanigans with this, Chain of Vapor, really with any of these creatures. And if you haven't noticed, they're all they aren't susceptible, I should say, to Cursed Totem. So really cool stuff. Ruminap Excavator, it's a Crucible of Worlds on a body, right? So you play a lot of lands, you play a lot of utility lands. Getting them back out of the yard can be pretty substantial, significant. It's a big part of why we want to protect our yard, and why endurance is just so good. So, Lotus Cobra. Lotus Cobra seems so innocuous, but in coordination with Ghostly Flicker, right? We talked about this where if I pay 3 for Ghostly Flicker and I can only flicker 2 lands back, I'm losing a mana each cycle, right? Well, not with Lotus Cobra, because Lotus Cobra, they're going to exile, come back in, trigger your Tatyova twice. You're going to get the 2 cards. Hopefully, you're doing the Mystic Sanctuary loop, so one of them is going to be Ghostly Flicker right back and then a new card. And then the Lotus Cobra, you trigger that, and you're going to make 2 mana. So now you have your 2 mana, you tap Mystic Sanctuary, 1 other land, you leave 1 mana floating, you do your Ghostly Flicker loop. So each time you're doing the loop, you're actually netting mana, which is pretty phenomenal. And the fact that it can generate a mana of any color when it does this, you can really kind of control everything, make your blue, make your green. So really great card. Wayward Swordtooth, just an additional land drop effect. We are trying to landfall pretty hard. We're trying to ramp ourselves out, and we're not doing it with mana rocks, right? We're doing it with good old lands. So it's a 5/5 body. Again, it seems kind of innocuous, but when you go into things like temporal manipulation turns, it's no joke. And I've gone the distance beating down face with this guy a number of times. Just a really solid card. Elvish Spirit Guide. So this one might seem a little weird. I play tested the ever-living heck out of Mox Diamond, and ultimately it just wasn't that good in this deck. Discarding the land, going down that card, and then being susceptible to Null Rod wasn't phenomenal. This is generally that little boost I want and need. It's kind of like a Lotus Petal, but it's a Lotus Petal that can get under the Null Rod. I understand it doesn't have the versatility, can't give me the blue, but that 1 green mana is sometimes the bump I need in a really quick opener. But then, mid game, it's not a dead card. I mean, it's a 2/2 body. I can't say that it's terribly relevant, but it could be. But then it pitches to Endurance. So I love this card. I'm pleasantly pleased with how it plays in the deck over Mox Diamond. Are there better options? Possibly. I haven't found them just yet, but I really like her. Azusa Lost but Seeking. Again, trying to make landfall. An additional 2 land drops a turn is huge. Yeah, she's a frail body. What's amusing to me is most times I play her, she becomes public enemy number 1 at the table. People try to kill her really quickly. They're unnecessarily afraid of this card. I don't know if it's PTSD from like old standard or who knows what, but she's usually eating removal, which always cracks me up. Because most of the time when I'm landing her, I don't really have the additional lands just yet, and I'm trying to get the snowball effect with Tatyova where I'm drawing the cards so that I can make the landfall. That's when she gets really scary, but when she first hits the table, she's usually pretty... Yeah, she's not scary. Collector Roof. Collector Roof is ridiculous. I love this card. Null Rod on legs. Really shuts down so much in CEDH, especially. All those mana rocks, artifact lands. Just a really solid card that most folks have to answer pretty quickly. So next we'll look at our enchantments. Pretty obvious, Mystic Remora. We're trying to draw more cards. Nothing wrong with hiding behind the fish for a little while and just netting cards. Same with Rhystic Study. It's one of those don't leave home without it cards. Trade Routes. Trade Routes is excellent. It can turn... I'm playing a lot of lands, so it can turn those lands into additional draws. It can put them in the yard for things like Ruminap Excavator and Crucible of Worlds. It can bounce my Mystic Sanctuary, so if I don't have the Ghostly Flicker. So for example, I don't have Ghostly Flicker. I play Temporal Manipulation. I bounce my own Mystic Sanctuary. I replay the Sanctuary. I put the Temporal Manipulation on top of my library. I end my turn. I go to my next turn. I draw my card. It's Temporal Manipulation. I play Temporal Manipulation. Use Trade Routes, bounce my Mystic Sanctuary. You see where this is going, right? We just keep taking our turns, and from there it's like sculpt your hand, build your board however you want to, start winning with creatures or however you want to. Really great card, very versatile. Wild Growth. So again, we're leaning into Null Rod. We don't want to play too many artifact rocks, mana rocks. And Wild Growth really acts as just that. So, what I will say though, because I get questioned all the time, why aren't you playing Utopia Sprawl with it? Well, I'm not playing a ton of forests. I am playing, enough, but I want to be able to turn one, get my tropical or my breeding pool, preferably, and wild growth it, or remove Elvish Spirit Guide from the game, and then wild growth, my island, if that's what I have, or one of my utility lands. I don't want to have to worry about, do I have breeding pool, tropical island, or a forest? And there are a lot of lands that aren't that. Whereas wild growth is almost always good. Um, Happy with this card. Carpet of Flowers, it's a meta call. A lot of decks you're going to sit down across from are going to have blue in them. Carpet's going to act as a little bit of a mana boost. I find that on average, it nets me about 2 mana, which is, nothing to laugh about, especially when we're doing our Ghostly Flicker loops and we want to be net mana. I can see an argument for cutting it. I wouldn't personally, but if you go to an event or your play group doesn't play a lot of islands, um, you know, I can see it. Good players are pretty cognizant that this card exists. They're going to be careful with their mana base on what they're playing, as to not feed into it. But that little boost is so worth playing it, in my opinion. Exploration, well, Fast Bond isn't legal. I wish it was, but it's not. So this is as close as we're getting. Absolutely love this card. Burgeoning, one of the strongest plays on the deck is turn one Burgeoning. Drop all your lands and then just go nuts from there. It's really good if you have a Tatyova out and you also have a Boro Palace in the clouds. So every time the Burgeoning trigger goes on the stack, you can bounce the Aboro, drop it, get your Tatyova triggers. It's a pretty scary card for your opponents. Can ramp you pretty quick. And yeah, I'm a big fan. Sylvan Library, I mean, you can draw 3 cards a turn instead of 1. Nothing wrong with that. You're playing all the fetch lands. So being able to look at the top 3 card selection, put 1 or 2 back, and then fetch them away, just really strong in general. This is something that I'm testing currently. A lot of treasures out there, a lot of artifact hate. So I'm not sold yet. 3 mana is a little extreme, especially when it's 2 green, double green. But the effect is strong. Whenever an artifact's put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, you may draw a card. There have been some games where I've run away with all of the cards that this thing has gotten me, and then there are games where I'm sitting there wishing this were any other card. I hate having dead cards at any time. I think there may be better. For a while I was playing with Energy Flux, which I absolutely love. It's an enchantment, makes all artifacts have an upkeep cost of 2 colorless mana, or you have to sacrifice them. I'm on the fence, but I may be going back to Energy Flux over the Revel. Narset Parter of Veils. It's like a mini impulse effect that can net you cards, which is always good. Pitches to Force Will, Force Negation, all that fun stuff. And then keeps your opponents from drawing additional cards. And when you have Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora and any other number of ways to draw additional cards in the format, it's pretty awesome. Oko Thief of Crowns, if you played Standard when this thing was legal, there's no explanation required. This card is absolutely bonkers. How this is a plus, target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. I don't know what they were thinking. It should easily be a -1, not a +1. Card is so ridiculous, but you can run away with games just on the back of this card. Next up, our mana artifacts. Zolring. So again, playing Norod, right? It seems like a non-bow. You have to look at these mana rocks almost like Lotus Petal effects. You're going to play them early game, utilize them. You have to think about, when is the right time to be dropping your Null Rod. Sometimes, you're 4th in turn order and your opponents have already played all their mana rocks. Well, you might play your Zol Ring and then play a Null Rod just to shut everybody down so that you're on even footing, right? But if you are turn one and you're ahead of everybody and you've utilized these to kind of get yourself ahead, then you may also turn on Null Rod. So it's really just in timing. But yeah, definitely playing Zol Ring, definitely playing Mana Crypt. How this card is legal, I will never understand. As a former Vintage player, this card is absolutely bonkers. And then also Mana Vault. So Mana Crypt and Mana Vault, when you're going Ghostly Flicker, you can actually use the Mystic Sanctuary and the mana from this, target the Mana Crypt or the Mana Vault and your Mystic Sanctuary. And with this, you'll just keep redrawing your Ghostly Flicker and you're going to gain infinite life. With this one, you actually can gain infinite life and net a colorless mana each time you do it, right? So you can get infinite colorless mana. Once you get to the point where you do that, so let's say you choose your finite number, you say 100. You've made 100 colorless mana because of the loops you've done, right? So then the next loop you do with the Ghostly Flicker, rather than target this, you target an island and your Mystic Sanctuary, so that when it flickers up, you're down to 98 colorless mana, but you've netted 1 blue, right? So you can convert that infinite colorless mana into colored mana. Card is really good. Jeweled Lotus, just an additional way to ramp out your commander. There are some really goofy, you can get your commander online turn 1, turn 2 with this card. Really awesome. So again, we're leaning into Null Rod. We still want to be able to ramp. This is similar to the 3 visits and your wild growth. It's just a way to ramp and get ahead with Null Rod. So really a fan, and it's going to lower the casting cost on your Ghostly Flicker so that you're kind of breaking even or hopefully netting if you have another one of these effects. This is actually, it's hard to see, but this is a Charlie Brown Sapphire Medallion. Cursed Totem, a lot of commanders out there, a lot of creatures with activated abilities that you want to shut down. I've seen Tatyova builds that utilize the little dorks that you tap to play additional lands from your hand, or your Llanowar Elf, Birds of Paradise, all that jazz. Cursed Totem, they don't run it typically, right? Because it's just Nombo in the deck. You see that I don't play Birds of Paradise, I don't play Llanowar Elf. It's because of this card. I would much rather be playing this to shut down the opposition than to give myself that slight, edge on ramping with those effects. So big fan of this card. Just a hate piece. Null Rod, one of my favorite hate pieces ever printed. So good, especially in the CEDH meta. Grafdigger's Cage, a lot of shenanigans going on right now. Underworld Breach, shenanigans, things like that. And this card, can do a lot of damage to those decks, and for the cost of 1 mana. Crucible of Worlds, we've talked about this. A lot of neat tricks that you can do with it. I mean, I've found myself in positions where I have like an exploration effect, and I'll wasteland or strip mine my own Mystic Sanctuary so that I can replay it if I don't have Ghostly Flicker or trade routes, right? So lots of neat little interactions, but again, it's just going to get you more land drops to get you more Tatyova triggers. The One Ring, when this card got spoiled, I thought this card is okay. I don't know how great it is. It's absolutely absurd. It's just going to net you so many cards. The protection from everything is cute and all, but it's really the cards. I've won so many games on the back of this thing alone, just getting ahead of everyone so quickly. I did test Manamo for a little while. It was just cute. It was like win more. It wasn't ever necessary. This thing, if you can get 2 or 3 turns out of it, you're just so far ahead. It's silly. And then that brings up the mana base. So, talked about it. Mystic Sanctuary, the linchpin, the all-star. This is it. This and Ghostly Flicker. You're just doing such amazing things. If you have 3 or more islands, when this enters the battlefield, it comes into play untapped. And when it does, you get to put an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. It's just amazing. This card made me fall in love with this deck. When I saw this card, and it was actually my first Thrones pack I opened. I hadn't seen a spoiler yet. I had taken a break from Magic. opened it and I was like, this can't be real. I had to read it several times over, and then I realized it was a common and not a mythic. Just love it. All the fetch lands. So Prismatic Vista, Misty Rainforest, Scalding Tarn, Polluted Delta, Flooded Strand, Verdant Catacombs, Wooded Foothills, Windswept Heath. Again, double Tatyova triggers, fixing your mana base, the ability to shuffle, do all that fun stuff. Obviously, you got to watch out for opposition agent. That's a real thing. Know when to play them. If you've been playing for a while, that's kind of an intuitive thing. Fetch lands are just absolutely incredible. You might ask yourself, why aren't you playing like Fabled Passage, or there's a common, I can't think of the name of it. I'm sure everybody is screaming it right now at their computer if you've lasted this long in the video, right? But it does the same thing, but the land comes into play tapped. We're trying to avoid in this deck anything that comes into play tapped where we can. We're all about speed and efficiency. That's what dictates a lot of the decision making in this deck, and that's why I'm not playing Fabled Passage and Evolving Wilds. That's the name of it. Tropical Island is the best forest ever printed, in my opinion. It counts as both a forest and an island, so you can do the tricks. 3 visits can go get it. Your fetch lands that say forest can go get it. Same with Breeding Pool. Playing 4 basic islands plus a snow-covered island, which is technically a basic island, right? So 5 islands. Then we're playing 3 forests. So 2 forests, 1 snow-covered forest. You might say, well, why the snow-covered forests? I was playing Field of the Dead, and my mana base was built really with that in mind. I've cut it, but it's one of those, it can go in and out of the deck pretty quickly, so I haven't necessarily adjusted the mana base around not having it. So that's why the snow-covered lands, but you really don't need them if you're not playing Field of the Dead. Yavimaya Coast, just versatility again, Field of the Dead. This is one of those I may consider cutting if I, in the long run, don't put Field of the Dead back in. What would I cut it for? Probably a Rejuvenating Springs or another island. Wasteland, sometimes you just need to deal with their utility land. Strip Mine, sometimes you just need to deal with their land. There are some games that go a little long if you're playing up against control decks where you can do Strip Mine, Wasteland, loops with Crucible and your Ruminant Excavator. So just really good cards. Blast Zone, it answers permanence and it's a land. This is the kind of thing that I use my Trick Bind to try and stop, and especially when we can recur it with those effects that I just mentioned. Card is really good. It's been really good to me over the years. I'm not considering cutting it anytime soon. Gemstone Caverns, it's a mana boost without being an artifact, so not susceptible to Norrod. Big fan. Ancient Tomb, same thing, right? It's the Zol lands, as they call them. Sunscorched Desert. So this card, when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target player. You can Ghostly Flicker. You can do Ghostly Flicker loops where you're flickering this in and out and just dealing 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, right? So you can ping opponents to death. So definitely a win con. Cephalid Coliseum. So many fun things you can do with this, right? You can sculpt your own hand. You can have a Thassa's Oracle trigger on the stack and force them to draw cards that they don't have and, kill them. You can also, if you have your Narset out, you can essentially eliminate their hand, depending on how many cards they have, of course. But a lot of fun things you can do with this card. More versatility. Not much you're losing by it not being a basic island, right? It's not fetchable, but it doesn't come into play tapped. It taps for a blue, has the ability to return an artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. And it's channeled, so it's a lot more difficult to disrupt. There are situations where I might just need to take out a Rule of Law effect at the end of my opponent's turn so that I can combo off. It's just versatile. Speaking of versatility, anyone that plays Modern probably knows about this guy. Besiege, answering artifacts, enchantments, non-basic lands, and it's such a low cost to do that. Card is great. Urza's Saga is a newer edition, so I actually cut Field of the Dead in favor of this. It helps me get into my mana rock artifacts pretty quick, And especially, we talked about how good Mana Vault is when we're comboing off with Ghostly Flicker. So sometimes we really just want that out as fast as possible. Or, good old Mana Crypt or Soul Ring. Nothing wrong with either of them. And then it also, the create a creature isn't the worst, because there are situations where, like, we start taking our turns, we can use Ramanop and Crucible to keep replaying this and make our little army of constructs just to win and overrun our opponent. Um, it's pretty good. It's the much slower version of Field of the Dead, but it's just as effective, especially when you're doing like the loops with Ghostly Flicker or loops with Temporal Manipulation. But it's got that added bonus of being a tutor for our mana artifacts, or a Grafdigger's Cage if you need it to shut down opposing decks. So really pleased with this card so far. Waterlogged Grove, mana fixer, tapping for the green or blue, but it also can net us cards, and we've talked about it ad nauseum, right? We're playing guys that let us play lands from the graveyard. So sack it, draw a card, replay it. Command Tower, mana fixing. The Siege Who Shelters All. I've been on the bubble with this card at so many different points. I don't like that it comes into play tapped, but man, is it phenomenal to do temporal manipulation shenanigans and make sure that it's uncounterable. And then also you can do like a Ghostly Flicker and make sure it's uncounterable. You can use this to Ghostly Flicker, but the problem is then it comes back into the battlefield tapped. So it's really great when you're using temporal manipulation. It's not so great with the Ghostly Flicker. Obviously, you can get one Ghostly Flicker uncounterable, but then it doesn't keep the loop kind of going. So, not thrilled with this card overall. I could see an argument for that. Talked about Aboro, such a low cost, right? It's not technically an island, but it's giving you the blue mana. It does not come into play tapped, and then does all sorts of shenanigans with your Besiege You. Just a fan in general. It's a pet card of mine. But yeah, that is the deck. Like I said, this has been my pet deck. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing, the pimped out version of my build of Tatyova. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. Feel free to reach out in the comments. I'll do my best to respond. But again, if you've made it to this point, thank you so much for watching, and be well and happy tapping.